I have died 7 times that I can prove, and at least 3 more I cannot. And the only reason I am still telling this is that someone has to remember Naomi Reyes before the Unwritten finish the job. So I am going to be careful. I am going to say her name in the first sentence and again now, and a 3rd time before this is done, because the way they kill you is not with a weapon. The way they kill you is by going back upstream of your life and unsoldering the joint that made you. The way they kill you is by making it so that the people who would have grieved you never met you in the first place. And then the people who would have grieved those people never met them. And on, until the universe runs a quiet little patch, and the war is over because there was never anyone to fight it. My name is Ellis Vance. The crews on Belt Station Theta-9 called me Ally because Vance sounded too much like a man who had earned something, and Ally was just a sound, a hello, a thing you said to a friend. I was the station physicist. That is a grand title for what I actually did, which was keep a temperamental causality rig from cooking the station's spine. The rig was called a Bocher coil. It was the size of a freight container, and it hummed at a frequency that gave half the crew migraines and the other half bad dreams. We used it to measure local time drift, because out on the frontier time drifts. The closer the Unwritten came, the more it drifted. Theta-9 was a hard place to love. She was an old habitat, retrofitted 3 times, welded together from the bones of 2 earlier stations that had been decommissioned, and towed out to the belt because nobody back home wanted to pay to scrap them. Her air smelled like coolant and rye bread, and the slow, sweet rot of vegetable oil that had been recycled 1 cycle too many. Her gravity ring squeaked at the 3rd bearing housing. Her water tasted of iron. Her commissary served the same 4 meals on a rotation that had been set by a quartermaster 15 years dead, and nobody had the authority or the spite to change it. We complained about her constantly, and we would have fought for her with our teeth. There were 41 of us aboard when the Unwritten came. I want to put that number down because the records do not show it anymore. The records show 29. 12 of the names have gone soft in the official log the way Carrasco's name went soft, the way the captain of the Talavera went soft, edited backward out of the roster because they were collateral on a different ledger. I have written the 12 names down in a paper notebook I keep in the inside pocket of a jacket I never take off. I will not list them here. They are not mine to give away. But I want you to know that the number was 41, and that I remember each of them, and that 2 of them used to argue every Thursday night about a card game that nobody else on the station understood, and that one of them kept a potted basil plant in his quarters and watered it with the dregs of his coffee, and that the plant was thriving the morning the cracks came, and that I do not know what happened to it. I had been on Theta-9 for 4 years. Naomi had been there for 6. Before her, before me, before any of us, the station had been a science platform, then a customs node, then a forward observation post, then whatever she was on the day she died, which was something between a tripwire and a lifeboat. Frontier Command did not call her a forward defensive asset because that would have meant funding her properly. They called her a monitoring installation. On the official charts, she was not even a circle. She was a small black dot, the size of a period. I had taken the post because the post had taken everyone else. The previous physicist had retired with a tremor in his hands, and the Bocher coil's manual annotated in the margins with what I can only call religious profanity. He had taught me for 90 days before he left, in the coil bay, with a wrench in one hand and a coffee in the other, and on the last day he had looked at me and said, "Vance, this machine will outlive both of us if we let it. Do not let it." I had not understood him then. I understand him now. He had known something about the coil that he had not been able to say out loud, the way old men sometimes know things about the war they fought in and cannot bring themselves to put into language. He had known that the coil was not a tool. He had known that the coil was a door, and that doors swing both ways, and that something on the other side of the door was paying attention. Naomi Reyes was the station's senior tactical analyst. She was 34 years old. She had a scar on her chin from a bar fight in a station I am not allowed to name, and a habit of cracking her knuckles when she was reading something she did not want to be true. She had been my closest friend for 11 years. We had served on 3 rotations together. We had buried 6 crewmates between us. She had pulled me out of a vented compartment on Hadrian 6 with her bare hands and a torn-up uniform sleeve tied around my faceplate. I had stayed sober for her wedding to a logistics officer named Carrasco and stood beside her at the funeral when he didn't come back from a supply run. She was the steadiest person I have ever known. When the Unwritten finally came for Theta-9, she was the one who looked at the readouts and said, quiet and flat, "They're not shooting at us, ally. They're shooting at last Tuesday." I want to put a few more things about her in here while I still have the words. She kept her hair short because she had once gotten it caught in a maintenance hatch in a way she did not like to talk about. She wrote left-handed and shot right-handed and could not explain why. She read books on actual paper because she said the screens gave her a headache, and she carried 2 of them around the station with her at all times, swapping them out of her uniform pockets the way other people swap sidearms. She had a younger sister who was a cartographer on a small station out near the rim, and she sent the sister a recorded message every Sunday night, and the sister sent one back every Wednesday morning, and the rhythm of those messages was the closest thing to a religion either of them had. She did not pray. She did not believe in much. She believed in Carrasco when he was alive, and she believed in her sister, and she believed in the work, and she believed, I think, in me, which was a thing I never deserved and never tried to give back in equal measure because I knew I would fail. She was, in the language of the manuals, a tactical analyst. In the language of the station, she was the one you went to when something had gone wrong and you did not yet know what to do about it. I had gone to her with broken equipment, with broken regulations, with broken crew, with broken hearts that were not mine. She had a way of listening that was not soft. She would let you finish your sentence, and then she would crack her knuckles, one hand, then the other, and then she would say, "All right, ally, here is what we are going to do." And the thing she said next was almost always right, and on the rare occasion that it was wrong, she would admit it within the hour and revise, without ego, the way a good engineer revises a calculation that has come back ugly. I am telling you these things so that when I say, later, that I died 7 times for her, you will understand that the math was not difficult. The math was the easiest math I have ever done. That was the inciting blow, if you want to use the language of stories. We were drinking coffee in the observation bay. The station's outer shutter was open because Naomi liked the view. The unwritten ships, when they finally crossed our threshold, did not look like ships. They looked like cracks. They looked like the seams in a piece of porcelain you didn't know was broken until you saw the light through it. 3 of them hanging in the black, vibrating at a frequency that made our teeth ache. They didn't fire weapons. They didn't need to. They unwrote. I want to describe the first sight of them because the description has gone soft in the records, and I do not want it to go soft in me. They came in from the high ecliptic, a vector nobody had been watching because nobody had thought there was anything out there to come from. The long-range sensors caught them first as a temperature anomaly, a small patch of the dark that was 3 degrees colder than the dark around it, which made no physical sense, and which the sensor flagged as instrument error. Naomi in the command bay did not flag it as instrument error. She had been watching the long range for 6 weeks the way a hunter watches a tree line. She called me on the internal line. She said, "Ally, get to the observation bay. Bring the good coffee. I want a second pair of eyes." I brought the good coffee. The good coffee was a tin of grounds her sister had sent from the rim, sealed in foil, which we rationed at the rate of 1 pot per crisis. We were down to 4 pots when the cracks came. We drank one of them watching the temperature anomaly grow. The anomaly grew the way frost grows on a window, not fast, steady. It went from a patch to a line to a seam. The seam became 3 seams. The 3 seams hung there in the black, perfectly still, perfectly silent, and we could not see them with our eyes, not really, not at first. We saw them on the sensor display. We saw them as data. Then the data did the thing data is not supposed to do. The data started to argue with itself. 2 channels disagreed about whether the seams were there. A third channel said they had been there for 6 hours. A fourth said they had not arrived yet but would in approximately 90 seconds. The Bocher coil, 3 decks down, started to hum at a frequency it was not supposed to be capable of. I felt it in my fillings before I heard it in my ears. Naomi set her coffee cup down very carefully. She said, "Ally, look out the window, not at the screen, the window." I looked out the window. The cracks were there. They had not been there a moment before. They were there now. They had not crossed the intervening distance. They had simply, at some point in the recent past that I could not pin down, decided to have always been in that position, and the universe had agreed. That is the closest I can come to describing what it was like to see an unwritten ship for the first time. The cracks were not in space. The cracks were in the agreement we had with space about where things were. They had renegotiated the agreement. They had done it without asking. I watched the long-range sensor log go pale, not blank, pale. The records were still there, but the names were softening. Ships we had escorted last month were now listed as vessel unknown. Personnel who had rotated through 6 weeks ago had become personnel unspecified. Naomi's hand was on my shoulder and her grip was tight enough to bruise, and her voice was steady when she said, "Get to the coil, Ally. Get to the coil now." She knew before I did. She always did. The Unwritten weren't here for the station. The station was a forward node. They were here to subtract the people who had built the network one by one going upstream. Wipe the engineers and the maps stop existing. Wipe the analysts and the strategies stop existing. Wipe the captains and the fleet stops existing. They didn't have to win battles. They had to win biographies. I ran for the coil. I made it 3 corridors before the first edit hit me. I felt it the way you feel a tooth that has gone bad in the night, a dull wrongness that you cannot at first locate. I stopped. I put my hand against the bulkhead. I tried to remember the name of the man who had taught me how to recalibrate the Bocher rig back at the academy. I could see his face. I could not find his name. It had been pulled out of me like a splinter. I made it to the coil bay. The lights were guttering. The hum had gone wrong, a third harmonic riding on top of the fundamental, the sound of a tuning fork that had been struck and then twisted. The rig knew what was happening to time even if the rest of us did not. It was howling. The coil bay smelled of burnt insulation and ozone. The deck plate under my boots was warm in a way it should not have been. The diagnostic panel on the east wall was flickering through error codes faster than I could read them, and the error codes were not codes I recognized. Some of them were in a language the panel was not supposed to have a font for. I do not know what to do with that information. I have never known what to do with it. I have written it down here because it was true. I want to be clear about what the Bocher coil could and could not do. It could not send a man through time. It could send information through time, narrowband, lossy, the way a flashlight can signal across a canyon if both parties know Morse. We had used it for navigation, for synchronization, for the small, clever tricks that kept a frontier network alive. What I did next was not what it was built for. I dragged the safety interlocks off with a wrench. The wrench was a half-inch ratchet that had been in the tool drawer of the coil bay since before I had been posted to the station, and the previous physicist had taught me, very specifically, to use it for the interlocks if the day ever came, and I had asked him what day, and he had not answered. I keyed in a coordinate set. I pointed the emitter at my own skull. I did not have a plan. I had a colleague in the observation bay with a hand on a coffee cup and a husband already dead, and a universe that was about to forget she had ever been born, and I had a machine that could push information backward through the local manifold, and I had the sudden cold understanding that information is what a person is. So I pushed. The first jump killed me. I want to be honest about that. The body I was in died on the floor of the coil bay with foam at its mouth and a burst capillary in its left eye. I have seen the medical record. It is in a folder I am not supposed to have. But the information that was Ellis Vance, compressed and screaming, arrived in the skull of Ellis Vance 72 hours earlier, sitting in his bunk reading a logistics report. I woke up in that bunk with the worst headache of my life, and the certainty that I had just murdered myself. I lay there for a long time. I do not know how long. I watched the ceiling tile above my bunk, the same ceiling tile I had watched every night for 4 years, the small water stain in the corner that looked like a horse if you squinted and a hand if you did not, and I tried to make my breathing slow. My nose was bleeding. My left eye was filled with something that was not quite tears. The logistics report had fallen to the deck, and I could see from where I lay that the date on it was 3 days before the cracks came. 3 days. I had 3 days. I got up. My legs did not want to hold me. I held them up anyway. I went to the small sink in the corner of my quarters and I washed the blood off my face and I looked at myself in the mirror that was bolted to the bulkhead above the sink. The man in the mirror had foam at the corner of his mouth and a burst capillary in his left eye. The man in the mirror should not have been alive. I told him so. He did not argue. The second movement of this thing starts here, and I will tell you plainly, I was not a hero. I was a man who had been given a second draft and did not know how to write it. I went straight to Naomi. I sat across from her in the mess and I told her, careful and quiet, that something was coming, that the Unwritten were going to be on us by Friday, that they did not kill people the way we killed people, that she had to listen to me. I sounded insane. I knew I sounded insane. She listened anyway because she was Naomi Reyes and that was what she did. She listened. She cracked her knuckles. She said, "Walk me through it again. Slower." I walked her through it again. Slower. And on Friday the Unwritten came and we were ready and it did not matter. It did not matter because they were not after the station. They were after her. I understood that only when I saw the edits start to land. The names that paled in the records were the names of people Naomi had ever served with. Carrasco's name went first, even though he was already dead. Then the captain of the Talavera, who had taught her tactical analysis. Then her sister, a soft-spoken cartographer on a station I had never visited. The Unwritten were not erasing the war effort. They were erasing her. She was the load-bearing wall, and they had figured it out before we had. I watched her face when she realized. We were in the command bay with the shutter closed because the cracks in the dark were making the junior crew vomit. She had a tablet in her hand, and the tablet was showing her a roster that should have had her sister's name on it and did not. She did not cry. She did not curse. She set the tablet down very carefully and she looked at me and she said, "Ally, I think I am the target." I said, "I know." She said, "How do you know?" I said, "Because I came back, from after." She was quiet for a long time. She cracked her knuckles, one hand then the other. She said, "How many times?" I said, "Once so far." She said, "And in the version where you didn't come back, what happened to me?" I did not answer. She did not need me to. She nodded once, the way she nodded when a junior officer brought her a casualty report, and she did not want to make them say it out loud. And then she said the thing that I have been carrying for what, by my count, is somewhere on the order of 9 years of subjective time, although I have only been alive in linear terms for 38. She said, "Then go again, Ally, until it sticks." I want to talk about the grind because the grind is the part that nobody tells you about in stories. You imagine time travel as a clever puzzle, a thing you solve. It is not a thing you solve. It is a thing you survive. Every jump tore me apart. Every jump killed the body I was in and dropped the wreckage of my mind into the skull of an earlier me who had to absorb it without going mad. I had nosebleeds for weeks at a time. I bit through my tongue twice. I lost the sight in my left eye for 3 jumps running and got it back on the 4th, which the medics never could explain. The Bocher coil was not built for this. I was using a navigation tool to perform surgery on my own life with a wrench and a prayer. The second jump I tried to evacuate the station. I went to the commanding officer, a hard-faced major named Vargas who had been in the service longer than I had been alive, and I told him what was coming. I had rehearsed the speech in my bunk for 2 days. I had stripped it down to the bones. I had taken every word out that sounded crazy and left only the words that sounded operational. Vargas listened to me. He did not interrupt. When I was done, he set down the cup of tea he had been drinking and he said, "Vance, I have known you for 4 years. You are not a man who lies. You are also not a man who knows what he is talking about right now. Go to the medic. Get yourself looked at. We will talk about this when you have slept." The major was dead 3 days later when the cracks came and I had not slept, and we never talked about it again. The third jump, I tried to destroy the coil before the Unwritten could arrive. I reasoned that if the coil was the door and the door was what they were coming through, then no door meant no entry. I was wrong about that, in ways that I only understood much later, but at the time the logic seemed clean. I went to the coil bay with a cutting torch and I started to disassemble the emitter housing. I got the first 2 bolts off before Naomi found me. She had been watching me. I had not realized she had been watching me. She took the torch out of my hand very gently and she said, "Ally, what are you doing?" And I could not tell her. The words would not come. I sat down on the deck plate and I put my head in my hands and I shook, and she sat down next to me and she waited, and after a long time I said, "Naomi, something is wrong with me." And she said, "I know. I have known for a week. Tell me what it is." And I told her, not everything, just enough. And she listened, and she cracked her knuckles, and she said, "All right, Ally, we are going to handle this together." And then on Friday the cracks came and they took her, and the handling did not matter. The fourth jump, I tried to be smarter. I did not go to Vargas. I did not go to Naomi. I went directly to the long-range sensor array, and I altered the calibration so that the temperature anomaly would be flagged not as instrument error, but as a hostile contact. And I encrypted the alteration so that nobody could undo it without my password. And I drafted a contingency plan for a defensive engagement, and slipped it into the operations queue under Vargas's authorization code, which I had no business knowing and which the previous physicist had given me on his last day with no explanation. I thought I had been clever. I had been clever. The station went to combat alert 6 hours before the cracks came. The defensive engagement deployed exactly as I had planned it. The Unwritten edited the engagement out of existence 20 minutes after it began. The records of the engagement softened in the log. The crew who had fought it began to forget they had fought it. By the time the cracks were fully manifest, the station was on standard cruise, and the major was drinking his tea and Naomi was reading her book, and the cracks took her anyway, and I went back to the coil bay and put the emitter to my skull and pushed again. I learned on the fourth jump that the reason they wanted Naomi specifically was that she had, 2 years earlier, drafted the tactical framework that the entire frontier defense was now built on. Not the famous one, the unfamous one. The one she had written on her own time in her own quarters on a station nobody remembered the name of, and submitted under a junior officer's signature because she did not want the credit. The Unwritten had traced the framework back to her. They had identified her as the joint. They were going to unsolder her. I had not known about the framework. She had never told me. I had found out the way I found out most of the important things about her, which was by accident, by going through the operations queue looking for something else and finding a citation to a paper that did not have her name on it and recognizing her voice in the abstract. I had recognized her in the rhythm of the sentences. She wrote the way she talked, short, hard, honest. Every paragraph ended on a verb. I had stood in the records bay at 2 in the morning, on the fourth jump, and read the framework cover to cover, and understood for the first time exactly what she had done. She had reorganized the entire frontier defense around the idea that the enemy would attack causality rather than territory. She had been right 2 years before the enemy showed up. She had not told anyone she had been right, because she did not need to be told she was right. She had just done the work and let the work do the convincing. I learned on the fifth jump that I could not save her by warning her sooner. Every time I warned her sooner, the Unwritten edited sooner. They were watching the timeline the way a man watches a chessboard, and every move I made they answered. I would arrive 3 weeks before the attack and they would arrive 2 weeks before that. I would arrive a month before and they would arrive 6 weeks before. There was no early enough. They had more time than I did. They had all of it. I started keeping a log. I kept it in the paper notebook I had begun on the second jump, the one I still carry, the one in the inside pocket of the jacket I never take off. Each jump got a page. Each page had a date and a casualty count and a one-line entry about what had failed and why. The pages were short at first. They got longer. By the fifth jump I was writing whole paragraphs, trying to capture the texture of each failure so that I would not repeat it. By the sixth jump I had begun to draw small diagrams in the margins, schematics of the unwritten attack pattern as I understood it, vectors of edit propagation, the slow inward spiral by which they erased a person from causality. The diagrams were ugly. They were also, when I looked at them in sequence, the closest thing I had to a map of the enemy. The sixth jump was the one where I broke. I will not pretend otherwise. I arrived in my younger body and I sat on the edge of the bunk and I cried for 20 minutes and then I went to the coil bay and I started to disassemble the rig because I was going to stop doing this. I was going to let it happen. I was going to let her go. The math was clear. The math had been clear for 2 jumps. I could not save her. I could only keep dying. I want to be honest about what breaking looks like, in case anyone reading this has been close to it themselves. It does not look the way it looks in films. There is no shout. There is no clenched fist. There is a man sitting on the edge of a bunk in a small cabin that smells of recycled vegetable oil, and his hands are shaking, not from emotion but from the cumulative neurological damage of 6 unauthorized jumps through a navigation rig. And he is thinking very calmly about how easy it would be to walk down to the airlock and cycle himself out. He is thinking about it the way another man might think about going for a walk. There is no drama in it. There is only the small, calm certainty that the work is too hard, and the body that has been doing it is too broken, and the woman the work is for is going to die anyway. And what is one more bit of bookkeeping to a universe that is already tidying her out of itself? I did not go to the airlock. I went to the coil bay instead, which was not better, only different. I had a wrench in my hand. I had the schematic of the emitter in my head. I was going to disassemble it carefully, the way a man disassembles a clock, so that nobody could put it back together after me. I was going to leave the universe with 1 fewer door, and then I was going to go to the medic and ask for something for the headache and lie down and let Friday come and not fight it. Naomi found me with my hands inside the coil. She was wearing the uniform she had been wearing on the day I had first jumped. She had a cup of coffee in her hand. She set it on the deck plate. She crouched down beside me and she looked at the disassembled coupling in my fingers and she said, "Ally, what are you doing?" I had not told her this time. I had not warned her. I had been too tired. But she had known anyway because she was Naomi Reyes, because she could read me the way she read a casualty report. She said, "How many times now?" I said 6. She said, "And it's not working." I said, "It's not working. I can't get ahead of them. They have more time than I do. They have all of it." She was quiet. She looked at the coil. She looked at me. She said, "Ally, listen to me. You're thinking about this wrong." I said, "How am I thinking about it wrong?" She said, "You keep trying to get ahead of them. You keep trying to be earlier. But you don't have to be earlier. You just have to be more." I did not understand her. Not at first. She picked up the coupling I had dropped and she handed it back to me and she said, "They're editing me out 1 timeline at a time. So put more of me in. Put more of you in. Stack the deck until there's nothing left for them to edit." I said, "That's not how the coil works." She said, "Then make it how the coil works." I want to put down here what she did not say, because what she did not say is the part that broke me back into a man who could do the work. She did not say that she was afraid. She must have been. She had to have been. A woman is sitting on the floor of a coil bay across from a friend who has just told her, in not so many words, that she is going to be deleted from the universe on Friday, and that he has died 6 times trying to stop it. A woman in that situation has every right to be afraid. She did not show me she was afraid. She showed me the work. She handed me back the coupling. She told me to think again. She gave me in that small gesture the only thing she had left to give me, which was her steadiness, and she gave it to me knowing it was the last thing she would ever give me, because she knew, the way she always knew, that if it worked she would not remember it. The versions of her that survived would not remember telling me to think again. Only I would remember. She was handing me an inheritance that she herself would never know she had left. I have thought about that moment more than I have thought about almost anything else in my life. I think about it when I cannot sleep. I think about it when the tremor in my hand gets bad. I think about the way she crouched on the deck plate with the cup of coffee cooling beside her, and the way she handed me the coupling, and the way she did not say goodbye, because she did not believe in goodbyes when there was work still on the bench. I think about it and I am, every time, ashamed and grateful in equal measure. Ashamed that she had to be the one to lift me up. Grateful that she could. This is the part where, in a different kind of story, a hero would have a clever idea and a montage would play and the music would swell. I do not have music. I have only what I did, which is the following. I went back to the coil. I jumped again. The 7th time. I arrived in my younger body and I did not go to warn Naomi. I went to the coil bay and I started modifying the rig. I built a feedback loop. I built a recursive emitter. I built a thing that the Bocher manual would have called an abomination and the safety inspector would have shot me for. I built a coil that could send information not just backward but sideways, into adjacent timelines, into the versions of this moment that the Unwritten had not yet edited, because they did not yet know to edit them. The modification took me 11 days. I did not sleep more than 4 hours a night. I ate what was in the coil bay vending machine, which was protein bars and a kind of synthetic apple sauce that I have hated since I was a junior officer and which I now associate, against my will, with the smell of solder smoke. I told the major I was running a long-form calibration, and he believed me because nobody on Theta-9 had ever questioned a long-form calibration in the history of the station. I told Naomi I was busy and she did not press, because Naomi never pressed when she sensed there was a reason. She brought me coffee twice. The second time she stood in the doorway of the coil bay for a long minute, looking at the rig, looking at me, looking at the schematic I had taped to the wall and which was annotated in a handwriting that did not entirely match my own because some of the annotations had been made on previous jumps and the muscle memory was off. She did not say anything. She set the coffee on the deck plate. She left. I think she knew. I think she had always known in some way what I was. I think she had decided, a long time ago, to let me be it without commentary. I did not jump back to save Naomi. I jumped back to make more of her. I jumped back to seed her, the information of her, the framework of her, into every adjacent branch of the local manifold that I could reach. I made her redundant. I made her load-bearing in 1,000 places at once. I took the tactical framework she had written under a junior officer's name, and I sent it, lossy and narrowband, into the skulls of 43 other analysts on 43 other stations, none of whom would ever know where the idea had come from, all of whom would write it down and submit it as their own. I made the joint unsolderable. I made her into a weed the gardener could not pull. It nearly killed me. It might have killed me. The medical record on that one is genuinely ambiguous. I came out of the coil bay with blood in both ears and a heart that was beating at a rhythm the medic on duty did not recognize, and a strange certainty that there were now several versions of me alive in adjacent branches, each of whom had done some part of the job. We were all of us the same man. We were all of us bootstrapping. The Unwritten came on Friday. They came the way they had come the first time, the cracks in the black, the porcelain seams. They tried to edit. I watched the records on the long-range sensor log. I watched the names. They paled and then they came back. They paled and then they came back. The Unwritten reached for Naomi and found her in 43 places at once and could not decide which one to unsolder. And while they hesitated, the frontier defense, built on her framework, hit them with everything we had. I want to describe the battle, because the records of it have gone soft and someone should write the long version down. The defensive engagement that came out of Naomi's framework was not a fleet action. It was not the kind of thing that goes in a history book with maps and arrows. It was a quiet, distributed, almost embarrassed kind of war, fought by analysts in 40 different stations who all believed, simultaneously, that they had thought of the same idea at the same time. The idea was this. You do not fire weapons at an unwritten ship. You file paperwork. You assert in the local causal record the existence of every interference pattern they have ever made, every person they have ever tidied, every line they have ever softened. You make the record so dense that there is nothing to edit toward. You overwhelm the filing cabinet. I sat in the command bay of Theta-9 while it happened. I held a cup of coffee that had gone cold a long time ago. I watched the long-range display the way a man watches a fire he is not sure will go out. The cracks in the black hung there, vibrating, and the data did the argument with itself thing again, the temperature anomaly fluctuating wildly. And then, after 12.5 minutes by the clock on the bulkhead, the cracks closed. Not all at once. Slowly. The way a wound closes when the body finally decides to commit to healing. The seams in the porcelain knit shut and the black went back to being only black, and the temperature anomaly that had brought them here read, for the first time in 6 weeks, as ordinary cosmic background. The hum in the coil bay, 3 decks down, went back to a fundamental tone without the third harmonic. The tuning fork untwisted. The machine settled. We did not win that battle, I want to be honest. We did not win. The unwritten withdrew. They folded back through the seams in the dark and they were gone. We had hurt them, I think. We had confused them, certainly. We had taught them that the weed had roots in more soil than they had counted on. They would come back. They would come back smarter. But they would come back to a frontier that knew their name, and that was a different war than the one we had been losing. The cost was real. I want to put that down because I am not the kind of man who can stomach the version of this story where the cost is glossed over. 8 people died on Theta-9 that day. Not from unwritten weapons. From the secondary effects of the editing. From the way the universe, when it is being unwritten and rewritten in close proximity, becomes briefly unsafe for ordinary biology. 2 crewmen in the engineering bay had aneurysms. 1 died on the deck plate. 1 died on the way to the medic. The medic himself, a quiet man from one of the orbital colonies who had been on the station for 2 years and who had once stitched up a cut on my hand with a steadier touch than I have ever known, had a stroke that put him into a coma he did not wake from. The cook had a cardiac event. The cook's apprentice, a kid of 19, drowned in the wet galley because he had been holding a bucket, and the bucket, briefly, had 2 locations in spacetime, and only one of them was in the galley. I cannot explain that one better than that. I have stopped trying. 3 more died in ways I am not going to write down because their families do not deserve to read it in this account. We buried them in the slow way, the spacer's way, with the airlock cycled at a respectful pace and a name read out for each. That was the cost on Theta-9. The cost in the 43 other places I had seeded the framework, I do not know. I have not asked. I do not have the right to ask. Some of them were stations that did not survive the year, for reasons unrelated. Some of them were stations that did. Some of the analysts I seeded the work into went on to long careers and never knew why a particular idea had come to them in the middle of a Tuesday afternoon. Some of them, I think, probably suspected something, the way Naomi suspected something the morning I stood in the coil bay with a schematic taped to the wall. I will not ever know. Naomi was alive. She was in the command bay when the cracks closed. She was holding a tablet. She was cracking her knuckles. She looked across the bay at me and she said, "Ally, what did you do?" I said, "I made more of you." She said, "How much more?" I said, "Enough." She did not ask me what enough meant. She did not ask me how many times I had died. She walked across the bay and she put her hand on my shoulder, the same grip, the same bruise, and she said, "Sit down before you fall down." I sat down. I sat down on the deck plate in the command bay, and I put my head in my hands and I cried, finally, for everyone I had been who had not made it back. For the version of me who had died on the coil bay floor with foam at his mouth. For the version of me who had given up. For the versions of me in adjacent branches who were, even now, finishing whatever piece of the job I had handed them, not knowing why, only knowing that the work had to be done. Naomi sat down next to me. She did not say anything. She did not need to. I want to tell you what I have learned, because that is what a man my age is supposed to do at the end of a story. I will try to be brief. The unwritten are still out there. They are smarter now. They have figured out, I think, that we are a species that does not stay edited. They have figured out that we compound. They have figured out that a human being who loves another human being is not a single point in spacetime, but a thing that propagates, a thing that seeds itself, a thing that bootstraps. They do not understand love. They understand it the way a man understands a fire he has not yet been burned by. They are wary of us now. That is the best I can claim. They are wary of us. I am old. I am older than my linear age, because subjective time stacks even if the records do not show it. I have 9 years of memory that the rest of the universe does not. I have headaches that do not respond to medication. I have a tremor in my left hand that the medics tell me is probably permanent. I have a folder of medical records I am not supposed to have, and in that folder, there is a death certificate with my name on it, dated 3 years before I am writing this. I keep it because I want to remember the version of me who did not make it. He earned the remembering. Naomi is still alive. She is the senior tactical analyst on a station whose name I am still not allowed to write down. She cracks her knuckles when she reads something she does not want to be true. She still has the scar on her chin. She is, I am told, drafting another framework, this one for offense rather than defense, this one for what comes next when the unwritten come back smarter. She has not asked me to help her. I am not sure I could anymore. The coil is gone. I took it apart myself, after, with the same wrench I had used to drag the interlocks off the first time. I did not want anyone else to use it. I did not want anyone else to learn what it cost. We talk sometimes. She calls on the long-range line when the static is low and the frontier is quiet. We do not talk about what happened. We talk about coffee mostly. She has opinions about coffee that I do not share. She is wrong about coffee in my professional opinion, but I do not tell her so. We have buried enough between us. We do not need to fight about coffee. She does not remember the conversation in the coil bay. I have checked. I have asked in roundabout ways, the way an old man asks a question he is afraid of the answer to. She remembers Thetanine the way the rest of the surviving crew remembers it, which is to say, with significant gaps. She remembers the cracks in the black. She remembers the dead. She remembers that I was in the coil bay and that something I did there had something to do with the fact that the cracks closed. She does not remember crouching on the deck plate and handing me a coupling and telling me to think again. She does not remember saying go again until it sticks. That conversation belongs only to me now. It is the inheritance I told you about. She gave it to me, and the universe filed away the copy on her end, and I am the only one in any branch I can verify who still carries the original. I am the curator of it. I will be the curator of it until I die, and after that I do not know what becomes of it. Maybe nothing. Maybe a notebook in a jacket pocket gets found, and maybe somebody reads it, and maybe they understand what they are reading. Maybe not. Either way, I have done my part of the carrying. I think about the unwritten sometimes in the small hours. I think about what it must have been like for them, looking at the timeline and seeing the weed they had identified, the joint they had marked for unsoldering, and reaching for her, and finding her in 43 places. I think about whatever passes for surprise in a silicate hive consciousness. I think about the moment they understood that we do not come apart along the lines they expect, that we are stitched together in ways that do not show up on their map. I think about the fact that they retreated. They did not have to. They could have ground us down anyway, in time. They retreated because something in their math had broken. They retreated because they had run into a human being who would not stay edited, and the man who loved her enough to make it true. I'm going to say her name a third time now because I promised. Naomi Reyes, senior tactical analyst, scar on the chin, cracks her knuckles, wrong about coffee. The woman who, when I told her I had come back from after, said go again until it sticks. The woman who, when I broke, said you are thinking about this wrong. The woman who is, in 43 branches of the manifold I cannot reach but know are there, still doing the work, still drafting the framework, still load-bearing. The aliens did not understand what they walked into. They thought they were tidying a weed. They were not. They were trying to delete a man's reason to keep breathing, and the man, it turned out, was stubborn in a way their physics did not account for. The man had a wrench. The man had a coil. The man had 9 years of subjective time and a willingness to die 7 times that he could prove and 3 more that he could not. The man had, above all, the conviction that some people are not optional, and that if the universe was going to disagree, the universe could take a number and stand in line. I sit on the deck plate sometimes in the coil bay that no longer has a coil in it, with my back against the bulkhead where I died the first time. I drink coffee Naomi would disapprove of. I watch the stars through the small porthole that used to be a shutter. The dark is dark. The cracks have not come back. Not yet. They will. I know they will. I am not afraid of when they do. I have been afraid of a great many things in this life, and I have learned that fear is mostly a tax the body charges the mind for paying attention. I pay it. I keep paying it. But the specific fear of the cracks coming back, the fear that animated me through 9 years of subjective time and 7 verifiable deaths, that one I have set down. I cannot carry it anymore. I have given it to the 43 I seeded, and to the versions of me in branches I will never see, and to her, most of all to her, because she is the one who is load-bearing now. The one who is drafting the framework for what comes next. She is younger than the work she is doing. She always was. But she is out there, and so are the others, the 43 I seeded, the framework propagating, the joint that will not unsolder. And so, somewhere in branches I will never see, are the versions of me who finished the work I started. I do not know them. I will never know them. But they got the job done, and I am proud of them in a way I do not know how to say out loud, and so I do not try. I am Ellis Vance. They called me ally. I kept a temperamental coil from cooking the spine of a station that does not exist anymore, on a frontier that is quieter than it has any right to be. I did one useful thing in my life, and I did it because a woman I loved like a sister told me to stop trying to be earlier and start trying to be more. I am going to die, eventually, in the linear sense, in this body, in this branch. The medics tell me it will not be long. The tremor is getting worse. The headaches are getting worse. I am all right with that. I have died before. It is not as bad as you would think. When it comes, I would like it to come in the coil bay, with my back against the bulkhead, with the porthole open. I would like Naomi to be the one who finds me, if the timing works out, because she is the one who pulled me out of the vented compartment on Hadrian 6, and it seems fitting that she should be the one to close the loop. I would like her to crack her knuckles when she reads the report. I would like her to be wrong about the coffee at my wake. I would like the universe to keep her in it, in all 43 branches and however many more I never knew about, for as long as the math allows. That is what I have to say. That is the whole of it. The unwritten will come back. They will be smarter. We will be ready because she will be ready because she is load-bearing because we made her so. And if they reach for her again, they will find her in places they cannot count, and they will pull back, and the dark will be dark, and the weed will keep growing. I have died 7 times that I can prove. I would do it again. I would do it again right now. I am going to put the cup down. I am going to close my eyes. The hum is gone from the coil bay, and it has been gone a long time, but if I am very still I can almost hear it, the third harmonic, the tuning fork twisted, the sound of a machine that knew what was happening to time before the rest of us did. It is a good sound when you are used to it. It sounds like work. It sounds like a man with a wrench and a reason. It sounds like her name.